but he is calling you to get out of your comfort zone and make yourself vulnerable and be with people who are, you know, who are sick, hungry, lepers, you know, the riffraff of society, and the people who are rejects for other reasons, like, you know, the centurion and Zacchaeus and people like that. So that's what he's calling us to do, and we need to figure out how it works for me and for us as communities of faith. What do we do with this? Because it's what we're supposed to do, isn't it? If we're Christians, aren't we supposed to be like Jesus? So if we're gonna be like Jesus, we got to go where Jesus went, and we got to do the kinds of things that he did. So it means we'll heal the sick, we'll feed the hungry, we'll flip the tables in the temple, we'll raise the dead. Like, I don't mean that literally, but or any of those things necessarily literally, but in some fashion, that's what we'll do. And we got to figure out how's that, what does that look like in the Forestbrook neighborhood or wherever else people are.
Leads really well into our next section, which is about practicing this. You know, so how do we, and we've kind of already talked about it, but, you know, a suburb of the GTA begin wrestling with a way forward, you know, as in how can we begin moving towards this picture of hospitality that is reflective of who Jesus is and what he is inviting us to be. And I think it's what you said, which is proximity. You know, go to the places that they're at and be with them. You can't fall in love with someone if you're not there with them. And if you were willing to give and be receptive, like you said, to the hospitality, I think all of that answers that question quite well. But is there anything else maybe you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things, you know, because we can say that and just so daunting to even start there. So here's some other things that I think we need to think about, particularly in long established church communities. First of all, we need to do some serious research, usually, to find out who those people are, quote unquote, in the neighborhood of the church, or even if the neighborhood of the church is where we're supposed to be working, right? Because churches now have so many people commuting from different areas. Maybe it's not in the neighborhood of the church. Maybe it's some other neighborhood. So we need to do some research. That's a simple thing, but people don't. They don't think of it. So do some research. Find out where people are, who the people are, and where they are, or where they hang out, who would match the descriptions of the kinds of people we've been talking about. So that's one thing. I think another thing, especially for churches that are evangelical or have an evangelical background, the way Forestbrook does, is, and for many Christians in other places as well, is that most of us need some kind of a theological rationale to be convinced to do something. So I'm like that. I'm a person who feels really uncomfortable if I can't make sense of something theologically. And that means biblically, right? I want to understand what the Bible has to say about it. So I would say to the people who do the teaching at Forestbrook that you could very well engage in a lengthy program of teaching about justice, the theology of justice, start to finish in the Bible, because it is start to finish. It's the most referenced subject in all of the prophets in the Old Testament, is the care of the poor, one way or another. And there's a comprehensive lexicon of language around issues of poverty and exclusion and oppression, affliction, destitution, and depression, incidentally. So we need to do some teaching. We need to educate ourselves, because we need to understand why it is we're doing this. It's not just flavor of the month. It's not just kind of some sort of liberal, woke, left-wing politics. It's the teaching of Jesus. It's the teaching of the prophets, time out of mind, that we do this stuff. You know, where I grew up, I had no. If you'd asked me when I started at Sanctuary, what does justice mean, I would have talked about the court system. I had no idea about a theology of justice, and I learned it on the fly at Sanctuary. And some of it I learned from at a distance mostly, but from Black theologians in places like Chicago, because they've been dealing with it for 150 years. They've been thinking about the implications of the teaching of justice throughout the scriptures. So again, we have not spent much time on that, and I think churches really need to do that. So I think those are things to think about once we've done and to consistently teach issues of theological justice and mercy and grace, and not just the personal grace that means I'm saved even though I'm a sinner, but the greater issues of grace, the redemptive work that Jesus did to destroy sin and death of every form. Um, so we need teaching about that. We need to do some research in our own neighborhoods so that we understand who's there. We need to do some thinking about how we would go be with people first to learn from them about what they think that they need. Um, and I think probably we need opportunities within the church context to put some of these things up, because you'll find several different categories, at least I'm sure of it, in your area. And it wouldn't hurt to put it out to people and say, is there a people group here? We've got these 4 people groups, and here's the distinguishing features of them. And I'll just pick things. I don't know if they're there, but I'll pick them. There's refugees. There's single moms. There's youth at risk. There's people who are involved in the criminal justice system. Just to pick 4 things. Who do you feel attracted to? Well, people on social assistance. That's an easy way, by the way. Go to the welfare offices and ask them, who they serve, what the people are like, and how the church can be involved. That's not a bad place to start. And there's lots of information on the internet. It's not that hard to do the research now. So figure out, how can we go be next to those people, and who wants to be next to those people, and don't require anybody to go if they don't want to, because they'll do more damage than good. And really reinforce to the people who are going to go, you're going to learn. You're not going to serve, by which we usually mean to fix things for people or to fix the people themselves. You're going to learn. And I think, you take baby steps that way. I think the danger with this kind of thing is that, because again, the nature of our society is that we want to establish a program, have it up and running in 6 months or a year. And, if we have 30% of the church population involved in those programs, we feel like we're doing a good thing. But being programmatic is probably not the way this is going to work. It's got to be driven by relationship. It's got to be driven by hanging out with people who offer us the hospitality of welcoming in the stranger, because we are the stranger. But that has to be taught, all of that stuff, because we don't think of ourselves as a stranger. So I would say that that's a critical piece of it. There is a place for platform preaching and teaching around this stuff.
I'm gonna end this with one more question. And I think it does have a bit to do with the generational piece as well. As we imagine what a flourishing community looks like in our context, what are some important?
Can you just repeat that last
Yeah.
little bit?
So a flourishing community
Okay.
looks like in our context. What are some important questions we should be asking ourselves and each other and our community?
As you imagine what a flourishing community would look like. Well, that's probably the first question, isn't it? What would a flourishing community look like? What would a kingdom community look like? Would be maybe another way of expressing that. Because when we think of flourishing, we might be tempted to think of that in terms that are dictated more by the cultural norms we live with every day. But if we think about what does a kingdom community look like, which by definition is flourishing, it's a place of justice and shalom. And shalom is such a beautiful word. It's usually translated peace, but it means more than an absence of conflict. It means the presence of health and wholeness and goodness and enough, that everybody has enough. So what would a community look like that had that? And also, critically, had at the center of it the Beatitudes people. What would it look like if Forest Brook became a community where people who were poor were not only welcomed or reached out to, but were actually at the center of the thing? They were the voices we were listening for. So, on Sunday at Sanctuary, last 2 Sundays actually, we have communion every week, and last 2 Sundays, a Mexican guy stood up. He's a naturalized Canadian now, but he's been on the street, close to the street for years, not homeless, but lived close to the street, struggles with addictions, post-trauma issues, stuff. He's an older guy. And for the first time, the last 2 Sundays in a row, he got up and he gave thanks for the cup. That's a kingdom community to me. I was thrilled when I heard that. His prayer was hard to understand, honestly. He's got a very thick accent. He doesn't express himself very well. He was nervous about it all. But the mere fact that he stood up and did that was precious. And when I see that man approach the communion table and lead us in worship and thanksgiving, I'm reminded of who is truly at the center of the kingdom of God. And it's not me. I'm somewhere out in the suburbs. And Julio was living downtown on the penthouse floor. That's the kingdom of God. So what would it look like if Forest Brook was going to become that kind of community? I think that's a big question on its own. And I'm not sure you need another question, honestly, at this juncture. Mm-hmm. There'll be all sorts of practical questions. How do we do that? How do we get there? Who is it? And so on down the line. But doing some dreaming, some envisioning about that would be a great place to start. Yeah. If Jesus gathered the people from our neighborhood, from our area in Ajax here, if he gathered the people to sit them down, to feed them and preach to them, who would be sitting there? Who would be closest to his feet? And we know what kind of people he gathered. So who would they be? Are they here with us now? If not, why not? Let's figure this out. That does require people like me, and to a lesser extent you, getting yourselves out of the way, right? So what I've learned through the years, because to pretend I don't have power and authority in the sanctuary community is just a lie. But what I've realized is that that rather than thinking about being a leader, I need to think about being a facilitator. So my role is somebody who has privilege, power, authority, position, all of those things in the sanctuary community for years, and much less so now because I'm like 80% retired. But my position is actually to facilitate, to create a scenario so that Julio can get up and give thanks for the cup. In the kitchen, Ronald, who is now the kitchen manager, Um, his role is to not tell everybody else what to do, but to gather the people from the core community, people who are poor and street involved, and empower them to cook the meal for the community, to be the hosts. That's his role. It's to facilitate. Now he does have management responsibility. He has to order food, and there's stuff that he has to do. But he's got to listen to the people in the community, because they're the ones really who are saying, yeah, you know what? We haven't done this kind of a meal for a long time. We need to do that. And this is how we need to go about hosting our friends. So that's from the very material to the kind of the evidently spiritual end of it. But I think we need to think in those terms.
Mhm.
Now, that's hard for us to do. Church
Oh.
culture consistently places in positions of power, authority, decision making authority, places people who are successful in the business world, successful in, you know, broader cultural terms.
Mhm.
And it's not that those people don't have skills or shouldn't, and those skills shouldn't be accessed, but as long as they're thinking about themselves being the authority or the leader rather than facilitating situations so that people who are poor and excluded can be at the center of the thing, the people who are poor and excluded will remain so. They might come to the church because you've been kind to them. They might come for a week or two, but if they're not welcomed right into the very heart of it, they won't stay. Bringing them into the church building shouldn't be the first order of business anyway. That'll happen if the other kingdom stuff does happen.